like it even works itself out from that.
I would replace the bolt then. Bolt was probably stretched and now it won't lock in. So if you can get a new bolt, which I doubt on these age of machines, if you can get a new bolt, put a new bolt in there, and then Loctite it, and it'll stretch tight, and it might not come out.
Putting it in a lathe and cutting off a quarter of an inch.
No.
What?
You don't want to cut anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
You got the lathe to do it, just make a new bolt and make it, over.
You talk about the length or the diameter?
So,
I wouldn't change the length. I'd put the exact same bolt back in.
Okay, so you're really talking about the diameter.
Yeah,
would be the benefit of replacing it.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm sure if we had Mr. Pancake in here, the engineer, he'd tell you that when you put a bolt in and torque it, it actually stretches.
Right.
Some bolts can handle being stretched several times, but some can only be just once. An example would be a head bolt on a car. You know, whenever you replace your head gasket, you have to replace your bolts too. So same thing, it's only a one-time deal.
you're supposed to.
Yeah. You're supposed to, yeah. Other bolts that are the same way are brake caliper bolts and stuff too, are typically one-time use only, especially on a motorcycle. Now I haven't had any problem with it. Try a heavier duty Loctite if you can't find the right bolt.
Okay.
On the clutch down here, I replaced my clutch at least once. The challenging thing on a Goldwing is this nut right here. It's, I don't know, I'm gonna blow this up. The nut right here is it's a round nut with 4 slots on each side at 90 degrees. So it takes a special socket to fit on there. If you don't have the special socket, it's very difficult to get off. You can get it off with a chisel, but you risk damaging it taking it off. But good thing is you can get the socket just on Amazon or eBay for $10 or $15, and it's about the size of a 3/4 inch socket with 4 little tabs that stick out on it to engage that, and then you can get it off real easy.
Another thing with clutches on the 1000s anyway, if all of a sudden if it's not adjusted right, and let's say it's a little bit too tight when you press down on it, you can actually press down on it and it'll actually slip over where it's supposed to go. So what you have to do at that point is you can do this on the road. I've done it. If you have a 10mm socket, you can take off the cover off the clutch pack, and then you take a screwdriver and pop it back into position. But just make sure you don't hit the clutch too hard, or it'll pop back over again, and you'll lose it until you pop it back in place again.
This is what your engine should look like all closed up. This is a 1200 engine installed in a original Goldwing. Can
I ask you a crazy question?
Yeah.
When you know the difference between the 3 or 4 different engines, the big Honda engines, is there a prefix difference in the serial number on the engine that you could tell what it is by just looking at the prefix? Because the question I have is, curious how many of these things were actually produced. Since we have the records, we could go back through and see what the engine numbers were if there was a prefix difference.
You're talking about in the the VIN number of the car?
A VIN number of the engine. Because the VIN number of the engine, and some of them are there. My car had a VIN number, my Yamaha Seiko. I'm assuming it would do the same thing for the big stuff.
So there were, I think, 4 engine codes within the VINs. There was for the 400 engine, the 500 engine, the Goldwings,
Okay.
and I can't remember what the 4th one was. But it, as far as I can tell, it doesn't differentiate between the two. I'd have to do some more research. But as far as looking at the serial number on the engine, you can tell whether it's a 1200, 1100, or 1000. I don't have that
I
information
was
off the top
almost
of my
sure
head
that
though.
in that, in the build sheets, it gives you specifically the number of the engine was going into it. Because that was the last thing that was filled out before the thing was sold or shipped.
But you have the build sheets, right?
Yes, I have all the build sheets.
Yeah, I'd have to do some research on that. Look over what
It'd be
you've
interesting to
got.
see if that was, would sure make it easier to, how many ones had that kind of problem.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, it would. Front end of the engine here, I mean, I can just point out a few things I see. The arrows are on your coils. Coils are typically not available anymore if you have one go out. Good news is you can buy aftermarket coils through, there's a couple of companies that sell Goldwing ignition parts and stuff, and I've got a couple on mine and they work pretty well.
Do you have a problem with them overheating because they're right there in the middle of everything? No airflow on them?
I haven't had any problem with mine. Has anybody else had any problems?
No.
I was just curious.
Yeah, typically they are kind of nestled up inside the false gas tank of the Goldwing. So I don't know how much of they really get up there. So
On one of the Goldwing websites, they said, and because I thought I had a ignition problem with the coils, they said they replaced them with something like a K-car coil, and they work great. You go down to AutoZone and buy them for $12, and you're good to go. And couldn't find out that wasn't what it was, so
No.
I didn't need to do that. But
No.
one of the Goldwing websites, that's one of the recommendations is that you can swap it for an automotive coil.
yeah, I wouldn't recommend that because the Goldwing uses a single distributor. On the ones with points, they've got 2 points, and when they fire, it actually fires 2 cylinders at a time. Yeah, and the coil itself, I'm having a little trouble with my mouse here. I'll show you mine. Mine are laid out a little bit different. You see, it actually has 2 coil wires, or 2 spark plug wires coming out of each coil. And then 1 coil fires at a time, so actually 2 cylinders go at once. So a K-car coil would be probably a single terminal coming out. You would need like 4 of them.
I've got a single. I'll have to double check, but I think I just had a single coil with a single plug coming out. 82 or 1100.
Go ahead, take a look at it.
Yeah.
There really wasn't a whole lot of change between that 1000s, 1100, 1200s. They just kind of upgraded things as they went along and figured it out more. These are the aftermarket coils I put on it. I forget what name they are, brand they are, but I'll put the information, I'll give it to our website, and we can post that as an alternative source. Thermostat on these is located right in behind here. Anybody replaced a thermostat before? If you ever have to replace your thermostat, it should be a 195 thermostat. They're pretty available. The key is just like anything, there's a rubber O-ring on them. Make sure you replace the rubber O-ring. And when you put it in, any rubber piece, when you put your engine back together, use silicone grease on it, so it's a little bit slippery where you put it in there, and that way it'll make sure it'll seat real nice. And then next time you take it out, it might still be good enough condition to reuse. If you don't, it might dry out and then you have to replace it. Another shot into the coils. Timing belts. Anybody replaced timing belts before on their car? The 2 black covers there are timing belts. The heads on these engines are on the sides. It's called a Boxster engine too. The pistons go out like this. And then right in the front, on each head, there's a pulley. And then there's one belt per pulley that goes to the center crankshaft, and then that drives the camshafts. And then there's 2 camshafts in each head. The belts do wear out, they do break. Fortunately, they're gold wing, so they last forever. So, which is probably why nobody's ever had to replace one. But if you do have to replace it, it's just right in there, and you got to pull out whichever side you're replacing. You got to pull out the 2 bolts that hold the cover on, and then you can get in there to release this tension on the belt and change the belt.
Do you have an air conditioning in your unit? Is that where they come through one of those plates with an auxiliary shaft?
There's a pulley that comes out in front of that for the air conditioners.
Yeah, I don't have that, but
Yeah, and it's right in front of one of the cars.
One more thing you gotta work around if you have an air conditioner.
That's why I changed the cars on mine, because mine had 19,000 miles and it never had any adjustments on the carburetor because they couldn't get past the air conditioner.
oh wow.
And then they took the gas tank that was below, that had a fuel pump, and stuck it on top, and had gravity feed plus, and couldn't adjust the carburetor so it wouldn't run below 3,000 RPM without flooding out.
Yeah, not good. Yeah, if you've got air conditioning, then you got the extra pulley coming right out the very front right here. And then I don't have any pictures of how the air conditioning system works on these. I was hoping somebody might have some, or if you've got some, send it to me. I'd love to see
There's
them.
been some, Chuck had one hit on that, but I've somewhere seen them. I don't remember who had.
Other thing down here, that's the oil filter. I don't think I have any shots of that. Obviously, that would you get at that from the bottom. This is left side of the engine. This is your distributor right here. So if you've got a system with points, that's where you adjust your points. If you've got electronic, obviously you wouldn't have points. That's where it would be located. I've got electronic in mine. Works great, lasts a long time. If you ever have problems with your distributor, I recommend you change over. And there's companies online that make them. That's most of the goodies I got on engines. Anybody got anything that we talk about on engines?
I have a 400.
You got a 400, yeah.
Yank it out.
Change it out. Yeah, so the 400s, everybody knows. I mean, 2-cylinder Yamaha engines, underpowered, and then undercooled.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of a challenge there. This is a front wheel assembly. I apologize for it being an out of focus picture, but it's a really old picture with a camera that had like a disc that you had to stick in the side of it to get pictures off of it. But this is the driver's side. I'm sorry, what we would call the passenger side of the car. This out on the end is the speedometer gear, and then followed in by bearings and a washer and I think it was a spacer. Yeah. This is a really interesting assembly that they built because they used Timken bearings on it, and they're sealed Timken bearings with a rubber seal on it. If you've ever changed an axle, you got a bearing and then you have a seal that you put on top of it. These seals are incorporated in the bearing, and that's all good. The problem is they didn't understand the engineering of it and where. I'm trying to remember which way it went, but it was supposed to be that the axle rotates within the seal, but in this case, the axle stays fixed and the bearing with the seal rotates around it. So it does actually cause our bearings to wear out faster. So if you've never gotten into your front end, I would recommend you go ahead and jack your front end up, take your wheel off, pull those bearings out, check them out, re-grease them, because they may have a lot of dirt in them just because the seals tend to fail. Good thing is that the bearings themselves have a number on the side of them, and you can just match them by that number and replace your bearings. Okay. And changing your front end is really pretty easy. It's just you just have basically 8 bolts plus your shock bolts, and then you can drop the whole front wheel assembly out of there once you disconnect your brake line, and then you can get to all that. And then you'll have bearings just like it on both sides of your axle. Obviously, you don't show the other side of the axle, but it looks just like it. And then if you go to replace your brakes, the brakes on these, all the ones I know of were a 1984 Dodge Omni brake calipers and brake pads. I think the wheel was off an Omni too, and the
rim
top,
is.
yeah, the rim, and the top.
All that stuff is available through a place in McHenry, I don't know where it was manufactured.
Really?
They have them in stock, yeah. We still do.
Well, that's good to know.
Do you have any trouble getting replacement tire for those, since they don't tend to make the same profile tires anymore?
155, 80 13s are the equivalent. That's what I just put on mine, and I measured it. It's all with the
Because
linear
some
caliper.
things
It's all the same.
All tires now are wider profile than what they used to be, and
Yep.
we run into a lot of problems trying to replace tires now.
Walmart, $21.
Really?
I just had one replaced last week.
Okay,
We're
so
gonna need that information probably. Would be really helpful.
yeah, so my tire is a 155 R13 78T, and I just checked at Merchants, and there were 5 manufacturers that still make them. So, problem is they're just not the greatest high performance tires. They're old school tires. Here's a front end lower control arm. We're looking from the back forward. The axle sits across the front here, and then the shocks tie into each of these tabs sticking up. And then in the back here, you have a bushing that sits through here, and then the upper control arm ties into that. This is probably an part of our machines that we don't pay a lot of attention to, but it does take a pretty good beating, as you all know. I found when I got up on mine, I took all the weight off of it, I could move it between the upper control arm and the lower control arm. So I took it out, took down to the machine shop, and we remachined new bushings for them, and then actually put a slot in the bushings, which you can see right here, and then fitted them with grease fittings so that I can actually lubricate the things now. And I haven't had any problem with them since. But if you feel like your front end's kind of wobbly or makes a lot of noise when you hit bumps, check it out that way. Take all the weight off of it and then see what moves, and then go after that piece that's worn out. And they didn't grease these or anything from the factory, so they will wear out. Here's an assembled front end. Again, here's your axle, brake line. Here's where the pivot point is, and it's in there where those bushings were we just talked about. And then your brake line runs all the way up. And then this is your steering head up here. These shots right here, these are Monroes. I don't recommend the Monroes because they required 125 pounds, and they tended to pop up real easy. I've got Gabriel's on mine right now, and they only require 75 pounds, and it rides a lot better. Here's a picture fully assembled. This was a picture I took of somebody's pulse. I don't remember who it was, but somebody's got coilover shocks on the front of theirs. Does anybody know if you've got coilover shocks?
I do.
You think you do?
Yeah.
I would like to try to identify your shocks and see if we can find them, because after I took this picture, I purchased a couple of shocks that looked very similar, but they didn't work quite the same.
There's still a I've purchased a couple sets of
Do you know, Doug?
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I'd like to know if you can find that out. Here's a little bit better shot of it. Looks like a Sensitrack shock. Who's got a headlight that doesn't, a pop-up headlight that doesn't like to work right? You got one? You got one? Okay. So what I found on these headlights, mine had problems with popping up. They would sometimes pop up, sometimes not go down. You had to play with the switch to get it to work right. Is that what you have to do?
Stick the wire in the,
Say again?
stick a little wire in there to try to activate it.
Put
Really?
the neural knob, get it to spin and it'll
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay. So here's the mechanism taken apart.
Is that the internal limit switches?
Yeah. Let me show you the next picture first. So basically, this is the mechanism. It's a relay and a motor, and a mercury switch, and the cover is taken off up close here. And what happens is you can see the motor over here. When it's down and you energize it, what should happen is it energizes the motor, and you see this tab right here and this tab right here, and those are connected to the shaft of the motor on a screw. And when the headlight gets all the way to the top, it gets to the same point, and it causes these two contacts down here on the bottom to shift, and then it says, I'm all the way up. It stops energizing the motor, and the motor stops. Okay, and then when you turn it off, what should happen is, because the contacts have shifted, it causes the motor to re-energize, go the other direction, and lower the headlight until it gets to the point where the other contact shifts and it breaks the circuit and it stops running. Okay. The problem is from the factory, at least on mine, there are 6 contacts on this, and they only used 5 of them when they wired them up. So I don't think whoever wired it up understood how it worked. So I reverse engineered the entire thing, showed how it should be wired up, and then posted it on our website. So if you're having problems with it, the wiring diagram that I drew by hand is there, and I can help you walk through it.
My battery went dead when I got it every 3 days, and I ordered a brand new one. And that was a culprit because those switches weren't working internally, and my power never shut off.
Yep.
So the guy I got working with, he just bypassed all that, fabricated a couple upper and lower limit switches and put a couple relays in, bing, bing, I'm gone.
Yep. So
I sat there one day and I realized that thing had lowered it 100 times.
Yep. So when you had to rotate your knob, what you were actually doing was you were breaking one of those limit switches there, and it was re-energizing the motor to go to the other position.
No, there's a knurled knob on top of it that
Yeah.
spins that shaft.
Yep.
You gotta push it 277 times to get that thing up.
Yeah, it's connected just beyond the picture to the armature. Yeah. So that's the culprit right there, and it's because they wired it up wrong from the factory.
That's the Fiero.
Yeah, it's out of a Fiero.
Okay.
And I tried to look those up, and at least at the time I looked them up, you couldn't find the things.
I think the junkyard thing is those relays, like drove me nuts about those relays out there. I just eliminate them. You don't need them. I mean, it's kind of hard on switches, but you could actually not use them.
So you just energize it,
No,
so it
they're-
looks like good and then you turn it off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, if you're just using the same switch, it comes up and it stopped because it can't go any further, but it's still energized.
Yeah,
The
you
switch
risk-
didn't shut it off, and then you go out there 2 days later, everything's dead.
yeah, you risk damaging it.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I wait for it to burn up.
Yeah, and there's also the mercury switch in there, which I'm sorry, right now I can't remember how the mercury switch played in there, but it was part of it the way it was. So the other thing too on these, if your motor doesn't work right, these two contacts right here, those are actually the contacts that contact the armature of the motor, and just like any carbon contact, they can wear out or they can get dirty. So in my case, I just got in there with a little bit of sandpaper, cleaned them up real nice. On the armature itself, you take you see it's kind of worn. You can see the difference in wear across the surface here. You just take a fine screwdriver or a pick, and you just pick out these grooves right here because it gets carbon in there, and it'll short it out. So you clean that out, and then why, the thing works pretty good after that. Radiator core for the heater. There's two kinds of heaters that I've seen on the cars. The original style was a simple heater like this that fit down in, when you're sitting in the seat, it fit down in right like this. Had a blower on one side and then hoses come out the other side to the air vents. On the later models, they took the heater core and they turned it flat like this and put a blower underneath it and just blew straight up onto the windshield. There were a bunch of those here today.
Are they any good?
The heaters, mine is. We looked at, I
Mine
think,
works good, mine works good.
No problem.
Tony, you in here?
Yeah, yeah, I got all
Yeah.
kinds of heat, yeah.
Yeah, so Tony's doesn't work right, but his fan works, but he wasn't getting any air out the other side, so I suspect there's an airflow problem in there.
That mouse shut-off valve might be broke.
Well, he didn't have a shutoff valve. His machine is one where they put a Honda Matic 600cc engine off of a scooter in the back end, so it didn't have that kind of cooling. But he still had the blower, so I suspect that they screwed that up somehow when they took the heater core out on his. So what's that look like? Here's the later model. Heater core sits flat, and the blower is underneath it, and it just blows straight up through the dashboard on the windshield. Anybody got one that works well?
Mine works fine.
Anybody use theirs? No? Okay. I use mine. Works pretty good.
I do, but what happens is you run it too long, it'll melt the plastic on your dashboard.
Yeah, the sun does a good job of that too.
But this will do it quicker.
Yeah, so that's another problem. If you got an original dash, it's probably all warped, right? It's because all our dashes were vacuum formed with heat, and our windshields do a really good job of collecting the heat from the sun, the solar energy, and remelting the dash. So I think they're all gone. I'll put a plug in for Doug here. I just put one of Doug's dashes in my car, and other than just a little bit of trimming to get it to fit the specifics of my car, it fit really well, and I know I will never have to worry about that dash warping.
What do you make them out of?
There's 2 layers of fiberglass, 1 layer of Negra, and then there's 1 layer of honeycomb for support.
Wow.
Yeah, now I don't know about that big round vent on this style here. I don't know where that came from. So you probably want to try to save that. This is something I did to mine here. What we're looking at is you're looking from the back of the engine forward, straight down on top of it with the carburetors removed. Okay, and this is actually the heating circuit, or the cooling circuit. This is the cooling, the hot water coming out of the left head. This is the hot water coming out of the right head, and it comes together. The thermostat sits right here. And then normally you just have an outlet right here that goes up to the radiator, and that's the hot water into the radiator. And what they did on these machines was they just simply took and put a T right on that hot water outlet and ran that up forward to the defroster, okay, and the heater. Your problem is, if you think about the way a thermostat works, until the engine gets hot, you're not going to get any hot water out of there because it's on the downstream side of the thermostat. So what I did was get around that was I actually had a additional fitting made right here, and it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but there's another block in there with a separate tap off, and that goes up to my heater, and then the thermostat actually fits forward of that up here. So now I can get hot water up to my my heater as soon as the engine starts to warm up, which gives me the ability, when my window's fogged up, to defog my window a lot sooner, and without having to wait for it to come all the way up to 195 degrees for the thermostat to and then I assume on yours, your engines will look similar to this.
Not mine. Mine's a lot dirtier than this one. This is beautiful.
Thank you. Remember mine, I put dual radiators on mine, so there's two of everything on mine. This is the radiator, the inlet to the radiator, or the outlet of the hot water, and it goes to the left and to the right. And then this is the inlet cold water coming back in from the radiator, and it goes down this way, and it'll go into the water pump to get pumped back into the engine. Yours should be similar, just without two. So when you're looking in there trying to figure out what each of the different hoses are, you'll have two at the bottom. One is coming back from the going into the water pump, and the other one is coming back from the heater right forward. This is your water valve up underneath your dash. Okay, everybody recognize that? No?
I have the 400. It don't
You got
matter.
400, that's right. Okay, so that's on the right side of your, on all of them I've seen, it's on the right side of your column coming up by your feet, just to the left of your gas pedal. And that's where you turn your water on and off. So you can actually you can regulate the amount of water going through your heater, so you don't have, you can control that temperature a little bit.
Not hot in the summer.
Kind of hot during summer. Yeah, so that's a good point. So you want to make sure you got this thing closed off in the summer so you don't heat up your passenger compartment. Especially if it's a rainy day, because if you got the heat in your passenger compartment and then you have cold rain on the outside, you'll fog up the windshield.
Is that a brake line lock?
Yep. So this is a good spot. So on mine, I put a brake line lock on the front brake. And so I can leave the thing parked in neutral with the engine running without having to worry about it rolling. And the way you do this is real simple. This is just a $30 piece and a couple pieces of brake line. And you put it in there in line with your front brake. And then you just press your front brake and hold it. Push this button in, let up on your front brake, and then let up on the button, and it locks the pressure.
Yeah. One issue with these things, certain states, they're illegal. And what happens is, if you all of a sudden screw up, all the light stars, the original like 11 or 12 light stars, all came with a lock on the thing. That's how they did it, because the Honda Matic has no parking brake. You jam on the brake, you put the thing on. But what happens is, if all of a sudden you put it on, you lock it off, the lines, then you have no brakes at all. When you try to just go ahead and pump them, you got to make sure you activate it and let the fluid flow, because it's all about fluid flow, right? For brakes. See what I'm saying?
No, I don't.
Okay. What happens with this thing? What you do, you go ahead and press the brake. You're putting pressure in the thing. You go ahead and put the knob on. You block it off, and so the pressure is maintained in there, even when you release your foot off the brake pedal. Okay. Conversely, if all of a sudden it's flowing and you don't have your foot on the brake pedal, and you go ahead and put it, you're blocking the hydraulic fluid, and then when you hit the brakes, the brakes don't see it.
Oh,
So you
yeah,
can
I see
actually-
what you're
you can
saying.
actually lock
Yeah.
the brakes out
Yeah.
using that. And that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why they're outlawed. Like I think in Michigan they're outlawed. Certain states they outlaw it.
So this particular one doesn't have that problem because it will not apply it. You cannot apply it without having the brake depressed. And as soon as you
Okay,
depress the
okay.
brake, it releases automatically.
Okay.
You don't have to manually do anything.
Mine leaky.
But that's not the way they work in the light stars though. The light stars.
Mine is a lock,
Yeah.
yeah, you press the brake, lock it, and then after about 5 minutes, it rolls down the hill and you're chasing it.
Yeah.
So,
So I can look up what this one is if you're interested and replace it with this one. And it's spring activated, and
so as soon
I
as you
actually-
release the pressure, you equalize it, it automatically kicks it back out.
now to release it, you just press the brake again.
Right, which is.
Yeah.
you equalize it.
Yeah.
When you let up, you're pressurizing one side, which is holding it against the spring pressure.
Right.
When you pressurize the brake pedal, you equalize both sides, and the spring pops it out.
That's right. That's exactly what happens. Yeah.
Dave, could you, when you get that part number, could you just put it on Facebook? And
Yep.
that way we'd all, everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, that'd be wonderful. Share.
Would that be in
Brakes for you.
the lock?
I know I have in mind, that tube that runs underneath the body, from the front end to the back end, all your tubes run through there, my brake line deteriorated.
Yep.
It rusts up,
Yep.
and then all of it, you can't see it leaking on the ground,
Yeah.
because it's all in the tube.
Yep.
Is that instructions when you get that switch pretty clear about how to install it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's easy. It was really easy.
It's in line. So
Yeah.
Oh, it's,
I can dig up some other pictures of how I did the brake lines and stuff, but it was really pretty easy. You got brake line bender, and you
Either
just
flare or knurl. Flare or, what do you call it, pieces on there that you put down and tighten up.
I would never use a manufacturer your own brake line, your own end on a
Yeah.
brake line. I would never do that. I always use the pre-made ones, and then I just bend them to match. It was really pretty easy.
How far do you have to go to get to the other part then? If you're gonna get pre-made. Because if you cut that in line, you're cutting it out, and then you got two sides of each one that you have to make fit. I mean, one's not bad because it's right there if you go to the master cylinder.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, we're looking at from the right side, master cylinder under your dash. You just gotta take the front line off, whichever one it is. Put a female coupling on it, run it down about 3-4 inches, however far down you put your switch, and then you got to come back up into the master cylinder with about a 8 to 10 inch line. But it was really pretty easy. Depends on how tight you bend the radius and everything like that.
Hey Dave,
Yeah.
for the benefit of everybody, the dot 3 mode that we use in those brakes, explain what happens to the moisture in the lines and why you
Yeah.
do this and that.
Okay, so I also race. Well, there's a good point. Okay, so I also race, and in order to race, you're required to change your brake fluid every year. And the reason that you have to change your brake fluid every year is because brake fluid is hydrophilic, which means it loves moisture. Okay, well, how do you get moisture in your brake fluid, you say? Well, every time you depress your brake, some fluid goes out of your master cylinder down to your calipers or your brake drums, depending on what kind you got. And then when you release the brake, it comes back up. Okay, that motion of going down and up sucks air into the master cylinder, and that air has moisture in it. Okay, so over time you absorb moisture into your brake fluid. Well, your problem is on these things, you see all that steel? Okay, steel brake line, steel master cylinder. At least the front end of our machines are steel wheel brake. Help me out here. Caliper. The caliper is steel. So when you get water in your brake fluid and you have steel, you get rust. Okay, and that's why our brakes fail on cars, all cars. Okay, the Goldwing back end brake is it's aluminum or magnesium, one or the other. Okay, so you don't have that problem, but the front end on our machines is.
Well, the bigger problem with that, though, is if all of a sudden you get water in it, what happens, the reason why you use brake fluid instead of water, you have
Yep.
other chemicals, is what happens when there's water in there, the brakes heat up and it gets above the boiling temperature. And what happens is you get air bubbles in it. And now what happens is with water or brake fluid,
Steam
and
bubbles,
besides
actually.
water or any fluid does not compress. However, the steam bubbles,
Yep.
do compress, and you have really mushy brakes, and you can lose your brakes by excessive heat.
Yep. So the question on dot 4 brake fluid. Okay, there's dot 3, dot 4, dot 5.